Previously on The Dark Side of Love, the brutal murder of Brazil's sweetheart, telenovela star Daniela Perez has shocked and saddened the country. People are further stunned when her co-star, Guilherme De Pádua, is arrested for her murder. As secrets and lies about the murder and its motive come to light, Daniela's mother is determined to uncover the horrible truth about what happened to her daughter. Hello and welcome to The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love, and this week is part 2 of the case I'm calling Tune In to Murder. The night of Daniela's funeral, her mother Gloria receives an anonymous phone call telling her that if she really wants to know what happened to her daughter, she should go to the gas station next to the studio where Of Body and Soul tapes. Gloria, understandably, she's just buried her daughter that day. She's not up to investigating this, so she asks a friend to go there and check it out. He reports back that something definitely must have happened at that gas station because nobody's talking. Nobody is saying one word. Meanwhile, Daniela's husband, Raul, makes a public plea for the kids who were hanging around Tycoon Studios on the day of the murder and who took some pictures with Daniela to come forward with those photos because they might provide a clue. The kid's father comes forward with the photos, and years later, one of the young girls in those pictures, Marcela Nunez, would say in a brutal pact that Guilherme, who came out of the studio with Daniela, and Marcela said she did not want him in the picture. She only wanted Daniela and just kind of reluctantly took the picture with him. But she says that later on, Marcela says she sees Daniela and Guilherme talking, and it was clear that it was not a happy conversation, that something was definitely off to her, particularly with Guilherme. So much so that when he left, she decided to follow him. So she did, right to the gas station next door to the studio. According to Marcela, Guilherme pulled into a dark corner of the station and waited. As Gloria described it in a brutal pact, it was an ambush position. If Daniela came in, he could stop her. If she didn't, he'd see her car from the road and could follow her. The kids, it was Marcela, she was with, some other folks, some other kids. The kids were not able to stay and watch what happened next, and Marcela said in a brutal pact the next morning, when her mother told her about the murder, the first thing she said was, quote, "It was Bira. Bira killed her," meaning Guilherme. That was his character on the show. It haunted Marcela because she felt if she could have just continued to follow Guilherme that night, that she might have been able to save Daniela. There's still a critical blank spot between the time Daniela left Tycoon Studios and her body being found in those dark, deserted woods. And now the question is also, how does that gas station fit into that puzzle? Determined, super determined to find the answers about what happened to her daughter, Gloria starts going to the gas station pretty much every day. And every time she goes, the attendants scatter, hid, ran away, every single time. But Gloria's not going anywhere, despite being threatened, stonewalled, out and out lied to, the entire shift of attendants who worked at the station the night of Daniela's murder being fired, and nobody knows where they are, nobody knows what's going on or where they live. She kept going to that gas station. Her persistence pays off. She decided to go on a Sunday, a day that the station was actually closed, and there was a watchman there. And it's that day that Gloria finally gets a real lead. He tells her he doesn't exactly know their names, but he knows what part of town these attendants live in, and critically, that one of them stutters. It's all Gloria needs, and she is off to the races. She stalks the streets of this neighborhood looking for those gas station attendants, knocking on doors, asking people in the street, going into bars and restaurants. Finally, she gets a tip on the address of where one attendant lived with his mother, Mrs. Dagmar. When Gloria knocks on her door, the woman slams it in her face. And every day, Gloria shows up at Mrs. Dagmar's house and waits, hoping that she will change her mind and talk to her. And every day, it's a no. Until the day, Gloria slips pictures from the crime scene under Mrs. Dagmar's door. And that's the day Flavio Bastos, the attendant with the stutter, comes forward and, at the urging of his mother, tells what he saw. According to Flavio, he saw a blue Santana, which was Guilherme's car, stop on the shoulder near the gas station. Daniela is also there, getting gas. One of the attendants, Antonio Clarete, recognizes her from the telenovela, chats with her a bit before she heads toward the exit. And that's when Guilherme's car, the blue Santana, springs from the shadows and cuts her off. He gets out of the car. So does Daniela. She's in between the two cars. There's an argument. As Antonio Clarete testifies, Guilherme punches Daniela and grabs her by the neck like he's strangling her. She's unconscious. He puts her in the passenger seat of his car. But then he gets behind the wheel of Daniela's car. That's because his wife, Paula, is hiding under a sheet in the back seat of the Santana, ready to drive that car away from the gas station. Now, depending on who you believe, which with these two, who knows, but Guilherme says he grabbed Daniela by the neck. Oh, and that bruise on her face, that claim that she was punched by someone, which is why she passed out. Well, it was her husband, Raul, who had accidentally elbowed her while they were dancing. No. You see, I had nothing to do with that. See, this is just the garbage that Guilherme is making up to get out of, what he's confessed to. Never mind that Daniela shot scenes that same day and that the makeup artist for the show would have seen a massive bruise like that. And they say there's no way in the world that they could have covered that up with makeup. Guilherme claims that Daniela just passed out in his arms when he grabbed her, not because he punched her. And that's when Paula stabbed her, because Paula planned the crime. I was her puppet, you see. She was the one pulling the strings. And that's the reason why Daniela had to die, because Paula was convinced he was having an affair with her, and if he wasn't then, he would do so at some point in the future. In another version, as told by Paula to one of her fellow inmates, she was the one to first stab an unconscious Daniela with a dagger that they had brought with them, not a random pair of scissors that Guilherme had claimed just happened to be in the glove compartment. The dagger being there points to premeditation, not an impulsive crime of passion. As Paula was stabbing Daniela, an impatient Guilherme grabbed the dagger from her, finished the job. Paula said that together, she and her husband pulled Daniela's body from the car and threw her into the bushes. Paula was apparently angry that Daniela was passed out the entire time and therefore was not feeling the full brunt of all of her rage, and that she tried everything she could to make her wake up. Tried hitting her, slapping her, shaking her. Daniela was out cold. According to this version from Paula, which again she told to an inmate when she was in jail, that after Guilherme knocked Daniela out at the gas station, she never woke up and was out cold the entire attack. This tracks with the evidence because there are no defensive wounds on Daniela's hands or arms. Their plan, Guilherme and Paula, their plan was to make it look as though some crazed fan had ambushed Daniela and in some mad, uncontrollable frenzy, murdered her. According to the account from this inmate, Paula expressed zero regrets and that, quote, if she could, she would revive her and kill her 1,000 times. Oh, goodness. Paula also apparently told the inmate that Guilherme said Daniela was, quote, snooty, and bemoaned Daniela's relationship with her husband and that, quote, he should have gone after the mother instead. Since he couldn't get to Gloria, he hunted Daniela. This version, the one that Paula told to her fellow inmate about how Daniela's out cold and she's stabbing her with the dagger, and then Guilherme gets impatient and he takes the dagger and he finishes off the job. That actually makes the most sense. They ambushed Daniela at the gas station. Guilherme punched her so hard she was unconscious. Then they drove out to this deserted area, took turns stabbing her to death, then got back in the car and went home. That makes the most sense of all the versions that these two have told about what happened that night. It would be 1997, almost 5 years before Paula and Guilherme's trials would begin. During their incarceration, while they awaited trial, they got divorced, and Paula gave birth to their son. Even though Guilherme says he won't speak again until his trial, the truth is, he treats his incarceration like it's some sort of press junket for a movie, because he gives countless interviews where he casts himself as a loving and faithful husband who's so very sad about what happened to Daniela, and he just can't understand why she kept throwing herself at him, because after all, her husband Raul, he loved her so much. And he keeps stressing how much he loves his wife, how devoted he is to her, how there was absolutely nothing at all between him and Daniela. And people are eating this up because they want his autograph. He's getting marriage proposals and a steady stream of visitors clamoring to see him. Journalist Lucilia Cordoville, who interviewed Guilherme, said for him, quote, being popular is all he ever wanted. So he's lapping up this attention like, cat and milk, I guess. And crazily, he's more popular behind bars than he ever was on the outside. As journalist Gloria Maria said, quote, he found his place. A fellow inmate of his said in A Brutal Pact that he never once talked about Paula, never talked about the baby, never wondered how they were doing. It was me, all the time. Direct quote. Paula apparently is also living it up behind bars, having basically turned her time in prison into a life of luxury, with other inmates cleaning her cell and even giving her wax jobs. Paula even has a key to her own cell, which has a remote-controlled TV, and there were even reports that she would be let out on a regular basis to go and meet Guilherme at a local hotel. So remember earlier I mentioned that Paula comes from a wealthy family, so it was her father's dollars, his money, that was making all of these perks possible for her. During this long, excruciating wait for their separate trials to begin, the media frenzy about Daniela's murder was at a fever pitch. Unfortunately, much of the coverage featured photos of her and Guilherme's characters, Yasmin and Bira, in provocative poses, which perpetrated this idea that the actors, Daniela and Guilherme, were having an affair, a belief that persists, unfortunately, to this day. And as I mentioned before, many of the media stories at the time quoted police as saying Daniela and Guilherme were having a hot and heavy affair. She snapped, and he killed her in self-defense. Daniela's family, the cast and crew of Body and Soul, and eventually the police say no evidence, none whatsoever, exists of an affair between these two. And that if there had been, there would have been no way in the world they could have hidden it on the set. Something else that Gloria had to contend with is being accused essentially of, quote, co-authoring her daughter's murder. The Cardinal of Brazil at the time wrote an essay that basically said, had she not written this telenovela, that these two cuckoo clocks never would have even had the idea to murder her daughter. Gloria is also subjected to interviews on TV shows asking her why she chose Guilherme. And shouldn't there have been better vetting of this guy? And doesn't she hold some responsibility because she wrote the thing after all? Just the most asinine garbage that you can imagine. Gloria had to repeatedly set the record straight that she did not cast Guilherme. The producers of the show did. that he was a professional actor who was on a list with Globo, which is the network that was producing the show, alongside other actors because he has, remember, quite a few credits to his name, including other telenovelas, the two plays, the Blue Jeans and the Leopards, a movie even he was in. Like, he's not some rando standing on a corner with a tin cup singing for pennies. He was a legitimate actor, and it was just a total fluke that he was even cast because another actor, Alexander Frota, was the first choice for the part of Bira, but unfortunately he wasn't available, so they had to start shooting, and as a result, Guilherme is the one who got the part of Bira. So back to the trials. So all this is just, again, this is just a frenzy, a swirl. There's just, it's a machine that's happening. A total cottage industry happening around Daniella's murder. So the frenzy, speaking of that, with these trials, it was like OJ level hysteria, just a circus. And in fact, these were dubbed the trials of the decade. The Guilherme and Paula's trials. Nominee for worst acting in a courtroom, Guilherme De Pádua, he puts on quite a show during his trial. Surprise. He shows no remorse, no humility, no tears. But as he's done in the past, you know he's acting out a monologue. Jose Munoz Pinheiro Filho, one of the prosecutors in the case, called Guilherme, quote, a mediocre actor who's actually worried about his career. To a lesser or maybe different extent, Paula was also putting on a show during her trial. While her now ex-husband is out here doing the most, she portrays herself as very meek, very demure, reiterates that she was nowhere near the crime scene, that she'd been at the shopping mall looking at baby clothes, and oh, isn't that sweet? And because it was the new year coming up, she was looking for a dress to wear for New Year's, Eve parties. Just very sweet, very wide-eyed, innocent little girl voice. And remember, though, this is the same chick who threatened to cut other women with bottles, in the process getting herself banned from places because of it. So take all this courtroom act of hers with a massive grain of salt. But she continues to stick to her story like glue that she wasn't there. Guilherme did it all on his own. And that when he came home and told her that he'd murdered Daniella, she couldn't have cared less. Like he told her he threw out some dry cleaning or something, just nonchalant, la-di-da, oh well, my husband murdered someone, I'm hungry, what's for dinner? Now, part of the problem that Paula has is that Hugo de Silveira, the witness who jotted down the license plate numbers of Daniella's car and Guilherme's car the night of the murder, he saw Paula in the car and pointed her out several times as the girl he saw that night. 2, Paula couldn't prove that she was shopping or whatever that day, not to mention the changing stories, and she did tell a fellow inmate that she did it, which you could say, okay, maybe she was bragging about being there, about being the one to kill Daniella, but there's just, it has the ring of truth, what the inmate said, Paula said to her. There was just too much evidence indicating that she was there and that backed up the story that she told the inmate. When it comes time to sentence Guilherme, the judge said he displayed, quote, a violent, perverse, and cowardly personality before sentencing him to 19 years. At Paula's sentencing, the judge said that she, quote, knowingly and willingly contributed to destroying the life of a defenseless person, and that she was unfit for social interaction and an undeniable potential dangerousness. Before she was also sentenced to 19 years, though because she was 18 years old at the time of the murder, her time was actually reduced to 18 and a half years. So this is the kicker on this. Under Brazilian law at the time, a first-time offender, which both Paula and Guilherme were, They only had to serve a third of their sentence and would be eligible for a work release program after serving a sixth of their sentence. Ultimately, Guilherme served about 6 or 7 years before he was released, and Paula, whose sentence was reduced further to 15 years because she took the bar exam, unbelievably, and passed, she got parole after less than 7 years served. Guilherme remarried a few times and went on to become a pastor, so, he's found his adoring flock and his parishioners who hung on his every word. However, not surprising, he never, ever, ever showed even half a drop of remorse for murdering Daniela. Over countless interviews, his story was always the same. The trial was rigged, everyone got the story wrong, and then he's whining about how hard it is to live his life and just fake tears and woe is me and oh, where's my Oscar, where's my award for my performance. So he was able, like a lot of people, he turned himself into a cottage industry, continually dangling the promise of new information about the case to salivating TV hosts. But it's really a bait and switch, because really what he does is he gets on, he yaps about himself and his church, never delivering on this so-called new information that he promised. His ex-wife Paula, meanwhile, she also remarried, had a few more kids, and went to law school. And in fact, deliberately took a class with one of the attorneys who prosecuted her. I'm not sure if she ever actually practiced law, but according to A Brutal Pact, she hosts parties at a local mall. I don't know what kind of parties, I don't know what that entails, but supposedly this is what she does. Unlike Guilherme, Paula has never given a single media interview since her release from prison. Guilherme De Pádua died on November 6, 2022, of a heart attack. He was 53 years old. Daniela's mother, Gloria, has said she has never really been able to mourn Daniela's death and that she's never had any peace, saying in A Brutal Pact, quote, "I just wish I never had to think about those people again." She's constantly having to protect her daughter, whether it's having to have Daniela cremated ultimately because people kept trying to pry open her grave, or defend her against these persistent rumors and media stories about that Daniela and Guilherme were having an affair and that she wouldn't let go of him and he murdered her for it. Guilherme giving YouTube interviews and the TV interviews, and she just feels as though she's on constant alert over all of these things. As her son Rodrigo noted in A Brutal Pact, according to Gloria, quote, "As long as I live, no one will cast any more stones at my daughter." Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. Also, while you're there, you can find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus episodes and other fun stuff. Learn more about my suspense novels about the dark side of love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.